She was 52 years old and she laughed at something I said on our third date, and in that moment, I decided I was not going to be alone for the rest of my life. That is the most honest account of why I married Gloria. Not love, not partnership, not the careful, considered decision of a man who had learned something from 58 years of living. A laugh on a third date and the terror of dying alone. I want you to hold that in your mind while I tell you what happened next. Because what happened next is what always happens when a man makes a permanent decision based on a temporary feeling. Everything fell apart. Not slowly, not gradually the way things usually fall apart in a life. Fast. In the specific and irreversible way that things fall apart when you have ignored every warning sign because the warning signs were inconvenient and you were 58 years old and frightened, and the loneliness after Margaret left had been so loud for so long that almost anything felt better than going back to it. My name is Harold Voss. I am 84 years old. My heart is running at 38%. Margaret and I divorced in 2004 after 32 years of marriage. I have talked about what led to that in other videos. The distance, the managed surface, the woman who packed a small brown leather suitcase and I did not go after her. She did not come back that time. I spent 4 years alone. And then I met Gloria at a dinner party in 2008 and she laughed at something I said, and I decided I was done being alone. Today I am going to tell you exactly what that decision cost me. Not to make you feel sorry for me, to make you think very carefully before you make the same one. Before I go any further, I need to ask you something. Have you ever made a major life decision not because it was right, but because the alternative felt unbearable? Not a small decision. A permanent one, a marriage, a job, a city, a version of your life you chose not because you wanted it, but because you could not face what was on the other side of not choosing it. Write yes or no in the comments, just yes or no. Because what I am about to tell you is not really about Gloria, it is about what happens when you let fear make decisions that require courage to undo. Number 7. I ignored every warning sign because I was 58 years old and I had decided I was not going to die alone. Gloria was a good woman. I want to be clear about that before I say anything else. She was not a villain. She was not a manipulator. She did not deceive me or take advantage of me in any deliberate way. She was simply a woman who was fundamentally incompatible with who I was and what I needed and how I lived. And I could see that clearly within the first 6 months of knowing her. We had different values about money, different rhythms about solitude and company, different ways of processing conflict, different relationships with our adult children that pulled us in directions that were always going to be difficult to navigate together. None of these were small things. All of them were visible within the first 6 months. I saw them all. I married her anyway. Not because I had thought it through and decided the incompatibilities were manageable, because the alternative was going back to the apartment that was too quiet and the evenings that stretched too long and the specific weight of being a man in his late 50s who had failed at the most important relationship of his life and was now living alone with that failure. I could not face that, so I faced Gloria instead, and I called it love. Number 6. Loneliness is one of the worst reasons to make a permanent decision. It is also one of the most common. I want to say that sentence again because I think it is one of the most important things I will say today. Loneliness is one of the worst reasons to make a permanent decision. When you are lonely, your judgment is compromised in a specific and dangerous way. Not obviously. Not in a way that feels like impairment. You still feel like yourself. You still feel like a man who is thinking clearly and making reasonable assessments. What is actually happening is that the loneliness is applying pressure to every decision you make. Pressure that makes things that are merely pleasant feel like things that are necessary. That makes a person who is simply available feel like a person who is exactly right. That makes the question, am I happy with this person, into a question that is impossible to answer honestly because the baseline you are measuring against is not happiness. It is the loneliness you are trying to escape. I measured Gloria against 4 years of silence, against 2 quiet mornings and evenings that stretched past what I knew how to fill, against the particular loneliness of a man who had spent 32 years sleeping beside someone and then suddenly was not. Measured against that, she was extraordinary. Measured against what a marriage actually requires of 2 people across the years, she was not the right person. But I was measuring against the wrong thing. And no one was honest enough with me to point that out, and I was not honest enough with myself to see it. Number 5. My children tried to tell me. I did not hear them. David called me 3 weeks before the wedding. He said, "Dad, I want to ask you something, and I need you to hear it as coming from love and not from interference," I said. "Go ahead," he said. "Are you certain about this? Not, are you happy right now? Are you certain that this is the right decision for the rest of your life?" I said. "I am certain, David," he said, "because from the outside it looks like you are moving very fast, and I know the last 4 years have been hard, and I just want to make sure you are choosing this because it is right. Not because it is better than being alone," I said. "I appreciate your concern." I used those exact words. I appreciate your concern. The words a man uses when he has heard something true and has decided not to engage with it. David did not push further. He came to the wedding. He was gracious and kind, and he shook Gloria's hand and welcomed her to the family the way a good son does, even when he has serious reservations he has been told to keep to himself. He was right. I was wrong. And I knew he was right the moment he said it, and spent the next 3 weeks telling myself he was not. That is the specific and exhausting work of a man who has made a decision he cannot admit is wrong, convincing himself every day that the thing he can see clearly is actually not there. Number 4. The second marriage collapsed the things the first one had left standing. Margaret and I had 32 difficult years, but we had built things in those years that survived the divorce. A civil relationship, a shared history with our children that meant we could be in the same room at the same events and be adults about it. A kind of hard-won mutual respect that comes from having been through something together even when the something ended badly. Gloria and my children were incompatible from the beginning, not dramatically, not in screaming matches or deliberate cruelty, just incompatible in the specific quiet way that produces 1,000 small frictions that never resolve and that accumulate over 3 years into something that cannot be undone. Claire stopped coming to the house within 18 months. David's twice-yearly calls became once-yearly. Thomas, who had been the most present of the 3 in the years after the divorce from Margaret, retreated in a way that I still feel today. I had taken a family that was fractured and fragile and imperfectly but genuinely present, and I had introduced a variable that fractured it further. Not because Gloria was malicious, because I had not thought carefully enough about what a second marriage at 58 years old would actually mean for the family I already had. I had thought about my loneliness, I had not thought about my children. And by the time I understood what was happening, it was too late to undo the distance that had grown. Number 3. The financial cost was something I was not prepared for. Margaret and I had divided our assets at divorce in a way that was painful, but fair. I had rebuilt to a point of reasonable stability by the time I met Gloria. Not wealthy, not where I had been, but stable. The second marriage lasted 3 years and 2 months. The divorce cost me approximately 40% of what I had rebuilt, not because Gloria was greedy. The settlement was legally straightforward. Because 2 households becoming 1 and then 1 becoming 2 again is expensive in ways that do not announce themselves clearly until the lawyers are involved, and the arithmetic is sitting in front of you in a conference room, and you are 51 months past the third date where she laughed at something you said. I was 61 years old and starting over financially for the second time. The first time at 58 had been survivable. The second time at 61 felt like something closer to permanent. I managed, eventually. With difficulty and reduced expectations and the specific humility of a man who has watched the same category of mistake produce the same category of consequence twice in a row and has no one to blame but himself. Number 2. The loneliness after the second divorce was worse than the loneliness that caused it. I want to say that clearly because I think it is the most important practical thing I can tell you about what I went through. The loneliness after Margaret left was real and heavy, and I did not know how to carry it. But it had a quality of legitimacy to it, a sense that what I was carrying was earned and real and part of a life that had been genuinely lived. I had 32 years with Margaret, 3 children, a life that had happened. The loneliness after Gloria was different. It had the weight of the original loneliness plus the weight of a failed attempt to escape it, plus the weight of what the attempt had cost my family, plus the weight of knowing that I had been warned and had not listened. It was the loneliness of a man who had made things worse by trying to make them better. That is a specific and particularly heavy kind of lonely. I sat in my apartment in 2011 at 67 years old, and I thought about David's phone call 3 weeks before the wedding. Are you choosing this because it is right, or because it is better than being alone? He was 27 years younger than me, and he had understood something I had not been willing to understand. That better than being alone is not a good enough reason. That permanence requires more than relief. That the loneliness you are running from will be there when you get back, and it will have company. Number 1. Here is what I eventually learned about being alone that I could not learn while I was busy running from it. Solitude is not the same as loneliness. I did not understand that at 58. I did not understand it at 61 or 67 or even 70. I began to understand it somewhere in my mid-70s when I had finally stopped running and had been alone long enough and honestly enough to start to hear the difference. Loneliness is the pain of unwanted isolation. It is the ache of a life that feels emptier than it should. It is real and it is valid, and it is not something I am dismissing. Solitude is something else entirely. Solitude is the quiet in which you finally meet yourself. After Gloria, after 2 divorces, after the financial losses and the family fractures and the specific damage of a man who had been running from himself for 60 years inside relationships and then running toward relationships to escape himself. After all of it. I sat in my apartment and I finally stopped running. And in the quiet, I met the version of Harold that had been waiting the entire time. The one who had surfaced in early mornings before the day required anything. The one who noticed how light came through a window at a specific time of day. The one who read until 2 in the morning and laughed at things that were not that funny and had opinions about things that had nothing to do with performance or usefulness. I met him at 72. I had been running from him for 60 years. He was not frightening. He was just Harold, and he had been there the whole time. If you are listening to this and you are alone and the loneliness is loud, I am not going to tell you that it gets easier. It gets different, and the different is survivable. And in the surviving of it, you might find something that you would not have found if you had kept running. Or you might not. But you will not find it by marrying someone because the alternative felt unbearable. I promise you that. Leave me a comment. Write yes or no to the question I asked at the beginning. And if you want to write more, write more. I read every single one. And if someone you know is at 58 years old and lonely and about to make a permanent decision based on a temporary feeling, send this to him. Before the third date, there is more to say. I will say it.